When I was 12, my friends and I would go visit arcades every Saturday. We'd ride on our bikes into town with a pocket full of quarters and dollar bills. We would work hard to earn the allowance that would allow us hours of gaming time. Luckily for us, there were 3 arcades to choose from, and we would always play rock, paper, scissors over who would choose where we'd go, between me and my 3 friends, Ryan, Bree and Jacob. I'd usually win, not that it really mattered. I'd usually choose the arcade that all of us wanted to go to regardless. It was near the beginning of summer, and a new arcade opened. Flyers were distributed everywhere. The place was called Clifford's Clown Arcade. Next to the logo, there was a clown with a red nose and excessively large eyes. I figured that must have been Clifford Clown. My friends and I were of course ecstatic. It was 10 times the excitement of discovering one of the arcades had a new game, especially because they said that each game would only cost a nickel. That Saturday, my friends and I had pedalled as fast as we could to the address of the new arcade, pockets filled with as many nickels as we could find, and it didn't take long before we got there. The building was tall, and it looked to have about 2 stories. It was painted different colours, red, green and blue. Above the doors was a sign that read, Clifford's Clown Arcade. My friends and I were extremely excited and we ran in as fast as we could. The inside though was even better than the out. There were hundreds of games, there was laser tag, and the decorations made the place look even more exciting. There were also odd-looking mascots around. They were all dressed up in costumes, which consisted of white face paint, a red nose, drawn-on smiles, and multicoloured clown suits. They called themselves Clifford's Clown Friends. They looked a bit weird to me, but some kid wanted hugs and autographs from them. They all happily obliged. Something about them though just seemed off to me. I told my friends this, and while Bree agreed with me, Ryan and Jacob didn't. They wanted the clown pins, autographs and everything. But being not too fussed about it, Bree and I decided to just ignore the clowns and play the arcade games. That's what we were there for anyway, and besides, they were extremely fun games, some of which I'd actually never seen before. After a few hours of being there and nearly rinsing all our money, the clowns had made an announcement that Clifford Clown was going to make a visit. Everyone cheered, and as soon as he made an appearance, the kids went wild. Bree and I kept our distance from him, but Ryan and Jacob joined in the eager crowd welcoming him down. Clifford Clown though didn't look like the other clowns. The mask looked old-fashioned and faded. He never spoke, and he made me nervous. Still, I ignored this and kept on playing. An hour later, my friends and I ran out of coins. Bree and I wanted to leave, but Ryan and Jacob did not. I made some excuse about how my mother wanted me to go home for a special dinner, and I was eventually able to get Jacob to agree that it was time to go. Ryan, however, wanted to stay longer. We told him fine, but that he would be riding his bike home alone. I still regret that. The next day we got the news that Ryan hadn't come home yet. His mother had called mine in hopes that he'd be here, and a few days later, the police had come to question me, as they had done with the other 2 friends. I told them what everyone said. We'd left Ryan there because he didn't want to come home with us. We told him that he had to ride his bike home alone. The cops assumed that someone must have kidnapped him on his way home that night. There were posters everywhere with his face on them, and warnings to parents not to let their children go out anywhere alone. A few days later though, another kid went missing. Then another. And by that point people were getting worried out of their minds. I was worried about Ryan, but I knew there was nothing I could do about it. When Saturday rolled around, my mother was reluctant to let me go out to the arcade. I told her that I'd be with my friends and that we'd be safe together the whole time. She gave in and let me go, but she told me to be home by 4. I agreed, and soon my friends were all out on our bikes. Jacob this time won rock paper scissors and decided that he wanted to go back to the Clifford's Clown arcade. Bria and I didn't really want to go there, but he'd won, so we didn't have a choice. Quickly, we dashed to the arcade and began to play the games. It was a while before Clifford Clown made an appearance. This was different from last time though. He seemed slightly taller and his costume was new. The mask didn't look old and faded, but as if it had just been made. Again, I ignored him and continued to play games. Every time I turned to look over my shoulder though, I could feel that clown's eyes watching me. When finally 3:50 came around, I was relieved. I told Bree and Jacob that I wanted to leave. Jacob was sad that he had to go, but he still left with us. It was when we were down the road from the building that I looked back at the arcade. I saw Clifford Clown staring at me from a window on the second floor, and it looked like he was watching me leave. Angrily, he banged against the glass before some of his other clown friends pulled him away and covered the window up. 4 days later, a total of 6 children had gone missing. All of them had one thing in common. Something the police had finally decided to look into. And soon, we'd gotten the news. The police had solved the case, after discovering that all the children had gone missing after visiting Clifford's Clown arcade. Because of that, law enforcement decided to pay the establishment a visit. They were greeted by smiling faces, but what stood beneath the surface is what was most disturbing. The owner of the arcade, Jeff Andrews, was found murdered in the upstairs employee area by a cult. The cult had gone as far as to impersonate Andrews in order to pay bills and to keep the place running. They also dressed as the Clifford Clown Friends mascots and gave hugs, autographs, and the various pins to visiting children. Not only was Andrews found, but the dead bodies of 3 missing children were also found as well. But their mouths, along with the mouths of the deceased, were sewn shut. It appears that they were forced to wear the Clifford Clown mask and even forced to walk around the arcade as the Clifford Clown mascot. Seriously creepy stuff.
This happened a couple of decades ago, but I've never forgotten it. It happened when I was 8 or 9 years old, around the late 70s or early 80s, when most malls still had arcades inside, and they were pretty dark for whatever reason. My mother had gotten a job working at the mall, and since it was summer, she insisted I go with her to the mall where I might find something to do, instead of hanging around the house watching TV and eating Little Debbie's all day. Her skincare store was boring to me, so I wandered across to the arcade and watched grown-ups play skee-ball or whatever games were popular back then. I had no money of my own at the time, but I soon realized that the adults in the arcade were all too happy to give their tickets away to a little girl. Of course, adults didn't want to exchange them for Chinese finger cuffs or a spider ring anyways. Within 45 minutes, I had collected tons of little tickets and was well on my way to buying the Magic 8-Ball. I'm walking around looking to see which games have no players, but tickets sticking out of them, or looking to see where the adults are. Adults who might be willing to give a kid theirs. But it was getting later in the day, and the customers were getting to be fewer and fewer. At this point, I'm just trying to decide if I should settle with the yo-yo with my tickets and be done with it when I see a man standing at the back corner of the building. He smiles a big friendly smile and waves at me. He's dressed in a solid white three-piece suit, which I thought was weird even for that era. He gestures with his hands that I should come over to where he was standing. I was a little confused since I didn't know him. I looked around the place to see if maybe he was waving at someone else. It was very dark in there. Perhaps he thought I was someone he knew, or maybe he was the owner. Was I in trouble for taking all the unclaimed tickets? He was still smiling and looked nice enough, so I thought I'd be a good kid who listened and followed directions whenever grown-ups asked them to do something. So I headed over towards him. I figured he must have seen me hanging around the arcade, and maybe he had some tickets he could give me. Yes, the magic 8-ball was still a possibility. As I get closer and closer, I see there is a neon exit sign above his head, and he is standing just in front of the rear exit door of the arcade. This is not the door leading into the open mall, but the back door that would have been used to get to the parking lot. As I got within a few feet of him, where he was standing with his hand outstretched, I went from feeling calm and happy to totally and completely terrified. I have no idea why I would have been overcome with such strong and sudden emotion. The man's facial expression hadn't changed and he was still smiling. He looked like a sweet, overdressed grandpa. I turned on my Buster Brown sandals and dropped each and every one of those hard-earned tickets and ran as fast as I could through the arcade, out the front door and into the mall, back to my mom's store where she was still giving ladies makeovers. For the longest time, I felt embarrassed whenever I remembered how I ran away from that nice man, and didn't understand why I suddenly got so afraid when there was no clear reason to be scared. Later, it dawned on me that this man was on the hunt for a little girl who appeared to be alone that he could kidnap. Standing by the back door, he could have grabbed me and been outside without anyone seeing us. Given all the beeps, whistles, and bells and noises in the arcade, no one would have heard me scream. My guess is that there was a car waiting just outside that back door, and I was just a couple of feet away from having been grabbed and stuffed into that car. And better yet, there were no witnesses left at that time. I don't know what or who put the sudden fear into me, but I'm very grateful for it. I'm still alive and have little girls of my own now, and I never let them go to the arcade. Nobody needs a spider ring that bad.
I work at a laser tag arena in an arcade. Long ago, it used to be a different building, taller, and it had an elevator shaft. Sometime in the early mid-20th century, a man fell down the elevator shaft and died. Said shaft is now covered with plywood, and I walk over it nearly every day of work. A woman who I work with, who has been working there as long as I've been alive, told me that she had seen a silhouette of what she believes to be the man who died there. Also, late at night, I've had people tell me that they would hear stomping on one of the ramps and the giggling of a little girl. Lights have been reported to flicker as well. We also have a laser maze in the arcade area that has turned on once or twice without any interaction at all, and lasers were tripped during this time, so there's no explanation for how they turned on by themselves. I worked today, and I usually try to rationalize any paranormal experience, but I ran out of theories today. We have packs like most laser tag arenas do, that are best described as bulky vests with light sensors on them. Our phaser guns have heat sensors on them, so that you cannot fire unless you have one hand on the sensor when you pull the trigger. I stayed behind during one game to fix a pack, next to all the other ones that we had hanging up. There was one that was relatively far away from me, and I was 100% sure that it had not been used today. When all of a sudden it showed the alert that there were not two hands on the phaser. This only shows up if someone has put their hand on it already. I stare at it for a bit, confused. and it goes off as if someone had their hand on it. A few seconds later, it says 2 hands again, like someone took their hand off. It was getting really weird, especially when there was absolutely no one about. At another point during the day, I went back to the room with the main computer. There was a sign that we have in storage that leans up against the wall. It had fallen down in front of the door in such a way that it prevented me from opening it. Normally I would dismiss this, but the way it was leaning against the wall means that someone or something would have had to have pushed it down and then moved it. Our packs make certain noises when they have been plugged into charge. Later on in the night, a few packs made that noise. I asked a co-worker about it and he joked that it was probably the ghost. Though, we've theorized that the EMF machines that spirits give off probably interact with the packs. I played with a Ouija board when I was in college last semester. I went to the school chapel, we used holy water, said a prayer, and never touched it again. But when I used it, this overwhelming sense of coldness swept over me. It wasn't like the thermostat was too low. It was a very strange kind of cold. Different. Like my skin would turn pale white, and my veins and capillaries would show in my hands. I have never experienced this, unless I was near a Ouija board in use. But it has happened a few times though. But this has happened to me throughout the night, whilst at work in different spots. This was all tonight. In the weeks prior, I have been in the pack room and all the packs would have been turned off, when all of a sudden, they would just turn back on again in unison, over and over. We also have a mechanical garage door separating the pack room from a different room, and it is required that we shut it every time a game starts. I walked out of a game and it was wide open once. I asked every co-worker if they had opened it, as it can only be opened from the outside, and they all said they hadn't. I've pretty much ruled out technical failure for every instance. Usually, turning the pack on and off fixes every issue. But tonight, nothing has changed. So many weird things are happening here, and I have no way to explain what or how. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. That's 3 of the 7 stories, so head on over to Darkness Prevails channel to get the remaining 4. If you enjoyed these stories, why not leave a like and hit that subscribe button, as you won't want to miss what's next. Also, don't forget that we have the 5k special subscriber competition going on. I've got some amazing entries so far, and I'd love to see what you guys can make, so please check it out for a chance to win. But for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you over at Darkness Prevails channel for part 2.